Hello, 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 and welcome to Updog Sports Talk on this beautiful Wednesday evening. My name is Matt Miller, and today I am joined by Justin McGovern. What's going on, dude?
Hey, the weather is so nice out right now, but that is not what we're here to talk about today. If you've been following along, you'll know that we have been in a series where we are grading the 2024 college football season for each FBS program, and today we are wrapping that up with the Mountain West, Conference USA, and we'll even touch on a few select FCS teams as well. So come join us. It's been a fun series, and this will be how we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, and if this is your first time with us, first of all, welcome. Second of all, we're a program that prides ourselves on sticking up for the little guy, and this episode actually pretty much defines that. Mountain West, Conference USA, FCS teams don't get a whole lot of representation unless you're Ashton Genty in the Heisman conversation. But outside of him, not much representation. So we are here gladly to talk about these teams, and we are Updog Sports Talk. And with that being said, Justin, let's jump right into the Mountain West.
Yep, and if you have not joined us before, we do these in alphabetical order. So this will start off with the Air Force Falcons. It was Air Force was dead last in Bill Connolly's returning production last year. And, when we were in our preseason preview, we kind of tossed around, would they be good or not? I thought, maybe Air Force is a machine and they could at least manage to still be solid. You projected them to bust.
Yep.
And you ended up mostly correct on that. They ended up 5-7. How would
I would
you
say
rate their season?
I would say mostly correct on that. They did have a good end to the season. They won 4 straight to finish it off, but from week 2 to I didn't count. They had like a 6 or 7 week stretch where they took an L. Couple good teams in there: Navy, Baylor, San Jose State had an okay year. Never mind. Just forget that last point. But I give them a D. I think a lot of people's expectations were high. I didn't have high expectations for them, and I'm kind of glad that I picked them as my bus team. Wanted to see more from them, and I do think they were capable of more, but they just didn't. They just didn't do much to start
Yeah,
the season
there
off.
was just, their offense, just something wasn't going. And even when they won their week 1 game over Merrimack, um, they only scored 21 points, which is pretty low against an independent FCS team. So it really took some time for their offense to go. But that last 4-game stretch was kind of that area where you started to look and see them and go, okay, this is starting to resemble the Air Force we're used to seeing. So I gave them a C. I can tend to weigh more heavily on how you end the season compared to how you begin it. So I liked the ending stretch there. The way they began and how they ended kind of indicates to me that there's just a lot of growing pains because it turns out there's a limit. How much turnover is too much turnover? Air Force found that out with with their lack of returning production and slow start. Next, we'll move on to the headliner of the Mountain West in 2024, and that is Boise State, Aston Genty. What a magical run this was.
Oh, so magical. I give him an A plus. Ashton Genty, he had 3 games over 200 yards, and I'm pretty sure every game he was over 100 yards. I think the lowest run total he had was against UNLV in the regular season matchup at 128 yards. So I'd say he had a good season. Their only loss in the regular season was to the Oregon Ducks. I mean, that's not a bad loss if we're
And,
saying
and,
good and
and
bad
don't
losses.
forget, like they didn't. It wasn't like as if they weren't matching up with Oregon on the field either. They lost the game on the last second field goal.
Yeah.
And the reason why Oregon was even in that position was 2 special teams breakdowns by Boise State, giving up 2 touchdowns.
And then
If it wasn't for those,
their only other loss was to a Penn State team that was what would you say, 2, maybe 3 plays away from the championship game. So I would say one of the best seasons ever. I would put it right up there with the 08 team that beat Oklahoma in the bowl game, in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't know which one would be better. I'm not gonna make that determination right now. But Boise State, hell of a season.
yeah, and I think finished number 8 in the polls. Even the Penn State loss was, it wasn't like as if they didn't match up in the field. There were plays that could have been made by Boise State to either make that a game or, I mean, who knows how that thing finishes. So, it was a very impressive team. Ashton Genty had a run for the ages. We have not seen a season by a running back like that in such a long time, and he nearly won the Heisman, an award that's been very quarterback heavy lately, and he nearly won it as a player that was not on a big name program in the big name conference. The only reason why he didn't was because Travis Hunter had such a historical season playing both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
It was just such an impressive run. And, I gave them an A just because, I think they could have even gone further. In the loss to Oregon, they had themselves to blame because, again, those 2 special teams mistakes that gave up 2 touchdowns cost them that game. Against Penn State was really, really good. So it's hard to tell, but Boise State made a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes in that game.
Yeah.
So those are my only docs on them. Again, incredible year by Boise State.
Yeah.
And they've really set the tone that, they can compete at this level moving forward.
Yeah. Very nice.
Next, we look at the Colorado State Rams. They ended up 8-5, but the way this thing started, it did not look like this was going to be possible. Now, entering the year, I think us and a few people in their circle kind of mentioned, Colorado State could be a nice sleeper team. Then there was the opener against Texas. That was a giant thud. A few weeks later, Colorado blew them out. I was like, oh, this team actually isn't looking that great. And then, they entered conference play and things got better. They nearly prevented the Boise State UNLV rematch before a loss to Fresno State at the end of the year. How would you grade their season?
I give them a B+. I wanted to see more from them, but most of their losses were to good programs. Oregon State, you can say maybe not that great, maybe former Pac-12, former Power Pac-12 team. That loss was 1 score, whatever. Fresno State probably should have won that game. It was a 1-score game, but Fresno State, not terrible either. And then my concern was they got absolutely housed by Miami to end the season in the bowl game. But I give them a B+. They did have a solid
Snoop Dogg Arizona Bowl presented by Gin and Juice by Dre and Snoop.
That was the best bowl game. They cut the name short about partway through that game, and then I was like, "Come on, you got to say the whole thing every time." But yeah, I give Colorado State a B+. Like I said, based on last season, I wanted to see a little bit more from them, but I don't think it was absolutely horrible.
Yeah, I give them an A-. I did dock them a little bit for a couple games that they let slip away that could have, the bowl performance could have stood to be better. But in the end, Colorado State, while high on potential, is a program that has gone through a really rocky set of years. It had been a while since they even reached a bowl game. So to break through and winning games, I think this season was a very good building block for the Rams program. So that's why I
Yeah.
gave them an A minus. Now we look at the Fresno State Bulldogs. This season kind of entered in a weird spot. Jeff Tedford, obviously it felt like the writing was kind of on the wall for a little bit. There's been multiple other times where he had to step away due to health concerns. And shortly before the season, he had to retire due to those health concerns. So it was a rocky start for Fresno State to begin with. But even with that, it felt like this team had the makings of a team that could contend for the Mountain West Championship. And they ended up 6-7. How would you grade the year?
I give them a C plus only because they made a bowl game and they salvaged their season with that Colorado State win. They took a 1-point loss to Hawaii. They were 2 scores away from beating Air Force, 1 score away from beating UCLA. So they were close in a few games, and then a couple of games like Michigan, it was a 20-point loss. They got absolutely housed by UNLV. 2-score game against Washington State. So C plus. It probably could have been worse if they didn't beat Colorado State.
Yeah, and some of those losses are kind of ugly on the resume. And yeah, obviously Air Force played better than last month, but not really a game that Fresno State wanted to lose. The Hawaii game was probably the low point of Fresno State's season because they had that game in the bag at anytime they wanted to, and just refused to put it away until Hawaii finally took it from them. So that was kind of a rough point. I ended up giving them a D. Tough circumstances, but at the same time, this season was definitely well below what Fresno State expected. The interim coach did not get the job as a result of this. They are moving on with former North Dakota State head coach Matt Entz, who left North Dakota State last year to take a position job at USC. So he has good head coaching experience and then got some California recruiting experience. So he's got a little bit of both. I think the future looks good for Fresno State, but this season, 2024, is not going to be one to remember for the Bulldogs.
No.
Next, we look at why Rainbow Warriors. This season was always an interesting one for them because they had 2 FCS opponents on the schedule. They originally were supposed to play Oregon. Oregon canceled the game like 3 months before the season. They had to replace them with a second FCS team. But even then, it felt like a bowl game was within reach. But the offense just never clicked as expected, and they went 5-7. How would you grade their season?
I give them a C minus. They did have a relatively tough schedule. I mean, they had to play Boise, Washington State, UNLV. If you want to consider UCLA a tough opponent, in terms of Big Ten versus Mountain West, but I give them a C minus. I think they could have done better. I think they could have tried to get a couple wins late in the season. I feel like they could have beaten Utah State, and I feel like they could have beaten San Diego State to kind of flip the narrative here, but they ended up losing. So 5-7, C minus.
Yeah, and the UCLA game, that was one that they led most of the game and let slip away. So that one kind of hurt. San Diego State was actually pretty similar. Just let that one slip away down the stretch. The Utah State game was a rare circumstance where Hawaii's players had to deal with snow, and they did not deal with the snow that well. I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Utah State had 42 by halftime in that game. So it just I gave him a C minus as well. I really was hoping this could be the year they break through to a bowl game, and it just never, like the offense just never got going. It never quite clicked to happen. Um, the schedule does ease up a lot this upcoming season. So, I think I still like Timmy Chang there, but obviously the future of Hawaii is definitely an interesting one. They had a athletic director who was getting stuff done. They unceremoniously fired him for reasons. Uh, so we'll see what happens there. They need to get Aloha Stadium back soon, but we'll see how long that takes. I think it's projected to be finished in 2030s, but we are huge Hawaii supporters here. We really want to see them do well.
Yeah.
We grew up on the days where Timmy Chang and Colt Brennan were slinging it all over the
Rest in
field.
peace.
And yes, rest in peace. And we just want to see them get back there. But 2024 was not that year.
Nope.
Next, we look at
Speaking of 2024 not being their year, the Nevada Wolfpack.
Yeah, so Nevada had a new head coach this year. It was really hard to know what to expect out of this team because, the expectations were low. They were expected to be towards the bottom of the conference because, new head coach and everything, not a lot of talent. It was going to take some time to get players in. And they opened the season. Do not forget this. They opened the season entering the fourth quarter with a 24-13 lead over playoff bound SMU in week 0, which is just wild to remember with how this finished. They end up 3-10. How would you grade their season?
I give them an F. I know they beat Oregon State, but they didn't win a single conference game. I don't know what else to say about that.
That was harsh. That is harsh because not only they got the worst conference schedules they could have gotten, outside of playing Hawaii, but they had to play Hawaii on the road. They had to play most of the better teams in the conference. I didn't really. I gave him a C. The first year coach, the team was so bad last year. So I didn't really have high expectations for them to begin with. I thought, whatever they could do to show progress would be a positive. And you know what? They did that. They beat Oregon State. They won at Troy in week 1, which was pretty cool. They battled really hard with a lot of teams. They battled in close games with both SMU and Boise State, who made the playoff. So, they showed they can at least compete with these teams. They weren't ready to bring any of these games to the finish line, but I actually was a little impressed with how they did this past year. I know the record doesn't show it, but I thought they made some good steps. That being said, all the 1-score losses also meant that I could give it no higher than a C.
Yeah.
Next, we look at the New Mexico Lobos. This is a program that desperately needed some sort of jolt. This past offseason, they hired Bronco Mendenhall, and he gave them that jolt. This offense was so much fun to watch this year. The only problem was, the defense was a work in progress, and they struggled to get stops. So New Mexico wasn't quite able to break through to a bowl game, but they went 5-7. How would you grade your season?
I give them a C minus. They did have a grueling schedule to start the season. But they lost to Wagon, Montana State. They got boat raced by Arizona. They got boat raced by Auburn. And then they lost to Fresno State, who came in 3rd or 4th in the division or in the conference. lost to Colorado State, took a bad loss to Wyoming, and took a bad loss to Hawaii. But they beat Washington State, and then they beat the teams they were supposed to. So I give them a C minus. Feel like they could have done better, but took a couple of bad losses.
I give them a B minus. Obviously it would have been cool to see them reach a bowl game, obviously bring some of these games home. Like the Wyoming game in particular was the one that really hurt because they had the lead late in that game. And if they had gotten that one, they would have made a bowl game. But at the same time, 5-7 is the best season New Mexico's had. And I'm going off memory here, but I think the best season they've had since about 2016. Right when the Bob Davie era was at its peak with the pistol option. And then obviously things trailed off there. New Mexico's been back since, but it was a fine season. It felt like they were making good building blocks. And obviously the hard part is that, Bronco Mendenhall got an offer he couldn't refuse from Utah State. More on that later, but so he left after 1 year, unfortunately. Bad luck for New Mexico. But their next head coach, Jason Eck from Idaho, is going to be a lot of fun to see with this program. And I'm excited to see what he's going to do there.
Yeah. So next up,
San Diego State.
The Aztecs. Little disappointed that they're still not playing. I just found this out this past year. That they're not still playing in what was it, Qualcomm Stadium?
Is Qualcomm Stadium even up anymore? Like,
no, I'm pretty sure they demolished it. I think I did the research earlier this season and saw that they demolished it. Forgot what game I was watching. But yeah, I found that out the hard way. I give them D. They were able to beat Wyoming and Hawaii in the middle of the season, and they beat an inferior FCS team. Outside of that, they didn't really compete.
Yeah. This is year one under Sean Lewis. They were kind of trying to figure things out. I was hopeful that, that they're all at least trying to score on offense would make it better. And they just they couldn't really hit the right marks on it. They didn't really seem to have the receivers. I mean, really just besides their run game, not a whole lot was working there. But, that made it tough. Their defense was okay. So it was just, it was one of those typical year ones where you bring in a new philosophy and it's just going to take time for it to work. Probably I gave them a C- for it. They ended up 3-9. So, I was going to grade it pretty kindly just because, it's year one. But, obviously it was a fun part of the year when, you touched on the stadium a little bit, but they play in the soccer stadium, which I if I remember correctly, like they bought it. It's called Snapdragon Stadium. But like all the soccer teams in the whole San Diego area also use this stadium. So it led to a very funny point in the middle of the season where the turf like almost like wore off and it just became this sandy turf. And every time you watch the game, you would just see sand kicking up as everyone would run. And it was so funny. Like I was just thoroughly entertained by it. I don't know why sand turf was so entertaining to me, but I had to watch every San Diego State home game the rest of the year because it was just so funny. But moving on to San Jose State, the Spartans, they were very close to competing for the Mountain West Championship in 2023, but lost their coach. But in place of him, they got Ken Niumatalolo. which really was a huge hire. Despite getting him, there were very low expectations for the Spartans. A lot of people seem to expect them to fall towards the bottom of the conference, and that's not what they did. They ended up being pretty solid and going 7-6. How would you grade their season?
Well, we just talked about San Diego State, so moving 7.5 hours up the coast, um, go from bottom of the state to top third. It's a big state. But I give them a C plus. They beat the teams they were supposed to beat, but they couldn't compete with the top of the conference, and I think that's what separates them right now. Like you said, I might bump that up to a B minus just because they didn't have any expectations, but I also didn't realize that their quarterback threw 446 yards against Boise State. I guess I just wasn't paying attention to that game enough, um, but yeah, I'll give him a B minus actually.
Yeah, I give him a B plus. I think the season exceeded expectations. Wasn't quite ready to compete with the top of the conference just yet, but they had some great games. The Oregon State win felt really great for them. They had the amazing Pac-12 at the dark game on the CW on a Friday night against Washington State, where they're so close to a win in that one. But this team was a lot of fun to watch. They did pretty well. Would have liked to see them get the bowl game, but it happens. 5 overtime game, very, very wild one. Was definitely one that felt like it was the return to prominence for the Hawaii Bowl. So thank you, San Jose State and South Florida, for that one. But I give them the B plus. Very solid year. I think this program is going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Now we look at the UNLV Rebels. Entered the season with pretty decently high expectations. They were definitely thought of as one of the top competitors to Boise State in the Mountain West. And, they started out strong and just continued that way. They went 11-3. 2 of the 3 losses were to Boise State. How would you grade your season?
I give them an A. Obviously they couldn't get over the hump to get past Boise State. They won their bowl game, but they lost that absolutely thrilling game against Syracuse, that overtime game.
I'm pretty sure another Friday night special.
And I'm pretty sure most of McCord's interceptions from the season came in that game. But yeah, I give them an A. They had a fantastic season. I can't wait to see what they do next year.
Yeah. I gave them an A as well. This was, they would have loved to come home with that, Mountain West Championship and the playoff bid. That would have been cool. But at the same time, this was a very historic season for UNLV football. There's not a lot of good history here. And, obviously I'm speaking off the cuff here without researching this, but I believe, if I remember correctly, 11 wins is a program record. So, this season was amazing from all aspects. They would have loved to brought home that Syracuse win. That was probably the only one I felt like they could have had that they didn't. But Pacific time zone Syracuse was a powerful thing that we didn't expect because we hadn't seen Syracuse in the Pacific time zone anytime recently before this year.
They went 12-1 in 1974.
Okay, I stand corrected. It's not a program record, but it's definitely the best season they have had in a long time. I gave them as A as well. Very good year for UNLV. Congratulations to the Rebels on this fantastic season. Now their coach was off to Purdue, which means Dan Mullen is coming down from the booth to run the Rebels program. It's going to be very interesting to see what he does there. Obviously, they lose there was a lot of key seniors on this team, but Dan Mullen's bringing in a strong transfer portal class, so it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Now
And
we look
then
at the Utah State Aggies. Now, Utah State we mentioned the chaos for Fresno State before. Utah State's coach got fired just weeks before the season. So, actually, it was probably just months. I think it was in June or July. But that set the season off on the wrong foot right away. They had some guys on offense that at least made their offense thrilling. They scored a lot of points, especially late in the year, but went 4-8 overall. How would you grade your season?
I give them a D. They beat San Diego State, they beat Hawaii, they beat Wyoming, and they beat Robert Morris. Outside of that,
Morris.
they lost 48-0 to USC. They lost 62-30 to Boise State, 50-34 to UNLV. They did have a high scoring game of 50-45 to New Mexico. They lost 49-28 against Washington State. This team was all over the place. They gave up so many points on defense, but all their wins were blowouts also. Well, not Robert Morris. They won 36-14, but Hawaii, they won 55-10, and San Diego State, they won 41-20. So yeah, I give them a D. Their defense couldn't stop a nosebleed.
I gave them a C. It looked like a lost year. It was a lost year. Bronco Mendenhall's coming in, so Utah State is ready to move on. I think that was a huge hire because, he feels at home in Utah. We don't expect a whole lot going on with Utah or BYU anytime soon. So I think he's going to be around for a very long time, and it's going to be interesting to see what he does with his program moving forward. Might be a 1-year rebuild. We'll see, but eventually Utah State is going to be pretty good at football again, and that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. Finally, we wrap up the Mountain West with the Wyoming Cowboys. Wyoming, Craig Bowl, walked off into the sunset with a bowl win last year and a pretty good season overall for Wyoming. They entered this year with slightly tampered expectations, but still, expect to be pretty solid, make a bowl game. That is not what happened here. They collapsed pretty hard, going 3-9. How would you grade your season?
I give them a D-, and the difference between a D- and an F is the fact that they beat Washington State to end the year. That's all I have to say. They lost every game. They lost to Idaho. I know Idaho used to be here. And I know Idaho is a really good FCS team, but if you're an FBS team, you have no business losing to an FCS team.
Yeah. And, they got blown up by North Texas. They were looking pretty bad right before the latter part of the year, really. And, at one point, their new head coach literally admitted, he was like, this program had a good culture and I lost it. Now I need to get it back. And, I think they actually got a little bit better after he admitted that. It was steps. I gave him a D+ just because, I think the latter part of the year, they started to look a little bit better. The Washington State win was a lot more of what we had come to expect from Wyoming. A grinded out game, trailing a lot of it. And then all of a sudden at the end of the game, when they needed a drive, they had one and won the game. That was the Wyoming football we had gotten to know under Craig Bowl. So, the plus is for seeing that happen again to end the year. We'll see what happens moving forward, but I think at the very least they could kind of take that win into the offseason and be like, okay, we kind of got our formula back. Maybe we can get back to winning in 2025.
Yeah.
As always, we're not going to talk about transfer portal or recruiting with them because that is not really Wyoming football. It's all about player development. So this offseason will be big.
Yeah. That is that part of the show. Yeah, and for those of you who didn't watch us last week, we did get our logo on the back of an ARCA Series NASCAR. It was such an honor. Shout out to Brayton Laster. You ran a hell of a race, kid. Kept the car on the track, avoided wrecks, and kept all the parts intact while you're on the track. So did a really good job, and it was an honor to be on your car. And Justin found out some figures that we can talk about off camera on how much it costs to sponsor the same size patch on a car.
Yeah, huge moment for us for sure. That was special. And then finally, I think the last bit of housekeeping items, obviously, as we were going here, I was watching the American Eagles clinch their berth to the NCAA tournament. So, we've been very much in tune with college basketball. Stay tuned next week as we go through our NCAA tournament bracket.
Hell yeah.
Can't believe it's that time of year. March Madness is here, man.
I know, dude. Like, I think that we need to get, and it's going to be hard to figure out what side of the bracket is what, because they don't do it the same way they did back then. But I think we need to try to plug as many of these teams into March Madness 2008 or yours NCAA basketball 2010 to see how many we can get right based on our own computer simulations, because that's the only thing we have to go on.
There we go. Oh man, yeah. That was always a fun activity to do, was to see if we could outsmart the machines. And then my wife fills out a bracket each year, and that's always a lot of fun. Which we'll have to see. She tends to be pretty biased, so if VCU makes it, I would fully expect her to take VCU to win it all, and I'm all for
it. Justin is probably going to go off camera here in just a minute. Just kidding. But yeah, that is the show. Follow us at Updog Sports Talk on X, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, YouTube since you're watching, or if you're listening on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music. I know I'm forgetting iHeartRadio. We're on everything. So follow us, like us, subscribe, show us some love. Tell your friends about us. We're trying to grow our channel and trying to represent the little guy. So we will catch you next time, and we will talk about college basketball.
Yeah, March Madness.
See you guys.